Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to read out several messages from different women about their struggles with enjoying sexual intimacy within their marriage. After I read out the messages, I'm going to share my advice, and I'm also going to share how you can receive some help and support from me if you're struggling with this too. Hello Amira, I'm a married woman, married for 2 years now with a 3-month-old baby. I don't know why, but I don't feel any pleasure during sex. In this question, I'll just briefly summarize. So this woman is looking for some tips on how to orgasm for women in different positions. And she also wants to know how to be able to orgasm from penetration. This woman is asking why she feels numb during penetrative sex and she only experiences pleasure during physical stimulation of the clitoris. This woman's been married for 10 years. She believes that she has a healthy, intimate relationship with her husband. He takes plenty of time to stimulate her before any penetration. Her question is it normal for some women to just not orgasm? So the woman feels heightened pleasure and the heightened pleasure increases, but there's no release of fluid and there's no kind of euphoric feeling. She's genuinely curious about this. This person is saying that she doesn't enjoy intimacy at all. She doesn't know what to do. Whenever her husband touches her, she pulls away because she's afraid that anytime her husband touches her, she's afraid that he's going to want it to lead to intimacy. Since having the kids, I'm always exhausted, not in the mood. Over the years, a lot has happened in our marriage, family interference, feeling my husband not standing up for me, etc. Her son has special educational needs. She doesn't know if there's like a slight resentment there, and that's why she pulls away. And during intimacy, it takes a long time for her to feel ready. She feels really ticklish and sensitive to touch. This question is with regards to women who have been, when they were raised as young girls, they were brought up in an ultra-conservative sort of family household, and so their perception of sex and intimacy and even their perception of the opposite gender has a lot of beliefs coming from that ultra-conservative family household. She's also mentioning in this question that these girls may not have received adequate levels of affection in their family or enough attention or expressions of love. The environment they grew up in may have felt unsafe. So the question is, how is a girl who's been brought up in this way, who feels unsafe, feels restricted, and probably has a lot of shame stored in her body, how is the girl meant to, when she, becomes a woman and gets married, how is she meant to embody her sexy, seductive, confident self when it comes to the bedroom? Is it through healing her wounds and doing the inner work? Why do some women feel shameful when thinking about some aspects of sex or exploring more pleasurable sex, apart from sex being a taboo topic as a child? What else could be the reason? So I want to start off by saying that there are two main parts to focus on when we're talking about sexual satisfaction and sexual pleasure for women within marriage. The first thing to focus on is when it comes to desire for intimacy. Some people may have heard of the word libido being used. And so in women, there are different things that can cause a woman to either feel desire for intimacy or inhibit her desire for intimacy. And I actually want to mention that there are different types of desire that can show up differently between men and women. The three different types of desire are spontaneous desire, responsive desire, and contextual desire. Spontaneous desire is the type of desire that doesn't rely on anything else to cause desire. So it kind of seems like, or appears that, if a person just wants to engage in sexual intimacy just like that for no reason, that kind of would come under the category of spontaneous desire. Responsive desire is dependent on arousal. So what is it within women that causes arousal? And it varies from woman to woman. Then contextual desire would be based on the external environment that person's in, if they feel safe in their environment, if it's the right lighting, if it smells good. So external environment, but also internal environment, in terms of what the woman thinks about herself and feels about herself, and what the woman thinks and feels about her husband too. In general, for women experience more responsive desire and more contextual desire. It's definitely possible for women to experience spontaneous desire, but in general, women experience more responsive desire and contextual desire based on the context, the environment, based on their thoughts and their feeling. There are men who experience responsive and contextual desire too, but it seems that in general, men tend to experience more spontaneous desire. So, with that being said, if you're a woman and you realize that you experience more responsive or contextual desire, you would need to take some time to reflect on what are some of the things that cause arousal for you or that cause you to desire sexual intimacy. Spend some time reflecting on that. And on the same note, take some time to reflect on what are some of the things that put you off intimacy, where you're just not interested in intimacy. For example, it could be if you're feeling really stressed and tired. It could be if your husband doesn't smell good. It could be if you just feel quite overwhelmed with things that are happening within the home or things that are happening externally. It could also be things related to your health, such as if you're not sleeping enough or you don't have good quality sleep. It could be difficulties you're experiencing with regards to hormonal imbalance or different medications that you need to be on, certain health conditions that you may have, the state of your mental and emotional health. Also, the state of your relationship with your husband. If there are relationship issues within the marriage, sometimes that can have an impact on your desire for intimacy. Other things that can have an impact are things like if you have a really busy career or you're very, very busy in business, but you're also very busy with taking care of the kids or the household duties. Desire for intimacy can also be affected by things like nutrition, your movement levels, your fitness levels, your overall physical health. Desire for intimacy can also be impacted by your body image, so the thoughts and feelings you have about your own body, or the thoughts and feelings you have about yourself in general, the thoughts and feelings you have about your husband. Desire for intimacy can also be impacted by whether or not you experienced abuse or trauma during your childhood, or if you experienced abuse or trauma even when you were an adult, such as if you were in a previous marriage or previous relationship, or abuse or trauma that you experienced in other situations. So something that came up in quite a few of the questions was regarding shame around women's bodies and shame regarding feeling pleasure during intimacy, especially for women. I've noticed that this usually comes from culture, so what others kind of told you growing up. You maybe heard things from your relatives or from your parents regarding things such as intimacy is just for the man's enjoyment and it doesn't really matter, like the woman doesn't need to enjoy it, or it doesn't matter if she doesn't enjoy it. That doesn't actually come from Islam. There are actually hadith within Islam that states the importance of women's sexual satisfaction within marriage. It's also important to know that within marriage, sexual intimacy between spouses is a form of worship, meaning with the right intention, if you are engaging in good, mutually pleasurable sexual intimacy where you're taking care of each other's needs and there's no forcing, but you're there because you want to satisfy each other, man and wife satisfying each other, you, inshallah, get rewarded by Allah for that because it's a form of worship. Also, sexual intimacy between spouses in Islam is a form of sadaqah, a form of charity, and we know that we get rewarded by Allah for that, for charity. So just know that there is no shame associated with sexual intimacy between spouses. So any shame you may feel most likely is something that you kind of inherited from the thoughts and beliefs of others, but it's important to learn how to detach from anything that doesn't serve you positively within your level of deen, within your marriage. Focus on what does Islam say. If you do have inner wounds related to some of the narratives you heard growing up, then it would be worth working with a mental health professional or a counselor or a therapist to help you process that. But what is so beautiful about Islam is that we are able to learn Islam from so many different sources, and so go on a journey of educating yourself properly with regards to sexual intimacy within marriage, and you will find that Islam is very much a sex positive religion. It's not sex positive in the way that society tries to, force sex positivity down our throats. It's not sex positive in that way. It's sex positive in terms of sexual intimacy between spouses being something sacred, being something valuable, being something beautiful. So and being something that is raised and elevated to the status of worship. Like, what better than that? The fact that you can enjoy physical, mental, and emotional pleasure with your spouse in a halal way that you are getting rewarded for. So it's like double pleasure. Pleasure in this dunya, where it helps you. It's a means to fulfill and satisfy your sexual desires with your spouse. So it feels good and pleasurable, and it's meant to be pleasurable for the man and the woman. And not just that pleasure in this dunya, there's also, inshallah, pleasure in the akhirah, in the next life, for the fact that you are getting good deeds for it. Now, I've mentioned that if it's not pleasurable right now, there are ways for you to learn about pleasure. I have a course that teaches women how to enjoy sexual pleasure within marriage from different types of sexual intimacy, whether it involves penetration or not. A lot of women want to learn how to enjoy pleasure, and also how to orgasm through penetration, which is something I teach in the course. I also teach women how to experience orgasm and pleasure from non-penetrative forms of sex. So I will leave some information about the course in the description below. I will also leave a coupon code to enable you to get 50% discount on the course. So one of the questions that came up was with regards to the woman only feeling pleasure when her clitoris is stimulated, but not feeling any pleasure during penetration. That's something very common and very normal for a lot of women, because the way that Allah created our vulva and our female sexual anatomy is such that our vagina doesn't actually have that many nerve endings. It is our clitoris, which is separate to the vagina. Our clitoris has so many nerve endings. So if you think of a penis in a man, a penis has a lot of nerve endings, which is why for a man, when his penis is stimulated, it provides him with a lot of pleasure. Similarly, in women, the clitoris, some of the clitoris is external, and then the rest of the clitoris is actually inside the body. But the clitoris itself is a sexual organ that was created by Allah for female sexual pleasure for women. And the clitoris has so many nerve endings, way, way, way more than the vagina. So it's common and normal if you don't experience that much pleasure from penetration, and if you only experience pleasure or orgasm from your clitoris being stimulated. It is possible to experience pleasure and orgasm through penetration through the vagina. It is possible, but if you struggle with that and you only experience pleasure or orgasm from your clitoris being stimulated, then that is fine. Communicate that with your husband and ensure that he satisfies you sexually by stimulating your clitoris. And for women, really, it's not just the physical element of the clitoris being stimulated, the mental and emotional foundation needs to be there too, for women to feel safe, to feel loved, to be nurtured emotionally by their husbands. That also makes a big impact in their ability to experience pleasure and experience orgasm through any type of sexual intimacy. One of the questions that came up was related to how an orgasm is actually meant to feel for a woman. Is there meant to be a release of fluids? Is it meant to feel euphoric? So it varies from woman to woman, and it can vary based on where she is within her monthly menstrual cycle. So sometimes, and if a woman does orgasm, it might feel quite intense, and other times it might not feel that way. So it doesn't necessarily need to feel euphoric. It just needs to, usually an orgasm will bring the woman a sense of satisfaction. She will feel like release, she will feel satisfied, she will feel fulfilled. And no, it doesn't need to lead to a release of sexual fluids. It's a bit different in men. With men in general, it's quite obvious when they've had an orgasm, because it usually leads to a release of fluid in men. Whereas in women, it might lead to a release of fluid and sometimes it doesn't. So an orgasm doesn't need to be accompanied with a release of fluids. An orgasm doesn't need to feel euphoric. What matters, and actually, it doesn't actually matter whether or not a woman orgasms during sexual intimacy. Of course, I advocate for women's orgasm during sexual intimacy, but the point of sexual intimacy isn't to orgasm. Of course, that is something that you want to experience. Really, the main point of intimacy between spouses is this: pleasure and connection. So if you're a woman who's struggling with desire, struggling with pleasure, struggling with not enjoying intimacy, I invite you to check out my course. It's called The Pleasure Is Yours. I'll leave the link to have a look at everything included in the course. The link will be in the description below, and there'll also be a coupon code below for you to get a 50% discount.